I'll show to my collection as we get onto the call as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
that
Who owns the Irish jersey in the back? My back left.
It doesn't normally sit there, but I put it up there just for this. This picture usually is in the hallway. That's actually Patty John's jersey.
Oh, nice.
But that was it was from Sevens in Hong Kong actually. And we didn't. What's that?
I just don't see you and Patty playing sevens, but I mean, I see you and Patty now more recent than I've seen you way back then. So
Rod,
he still comes to Newfoundland quite often.
9 times provincial champions.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're live there on YouTube now, so I'll just let people in. We'll get started if that's good with you guys.
Yeah, all good.
Sorry to interrupt. All right, perfect. All right. Okay. Go. All right. I'm just waiting for everyone to connect to the audio so make sure they can hear us.
Yeah, Rod, if you're wondering, all those jerseys are mine.
Huh. Even the one on the right?
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Because I played over there for a while and I don't remember seeing you.
No, that one was a gift.
Okay. So I think we have the majority of people in there now. So good evening, everyone. My name is Liam Moore, and I'm the Communications Director for the Newfoundland Labrador Rugby Union. Tonight on our webinar Wednesday series, we have Rod Snow, and we have a very special guest, and we greatly appreciate him and Rod for taking their time out of their busy schedules, Al Sharon. And we're having a special guest host tonight as well, Terry Chater. So just a few housekeeping things before I hand it over to Terry. You'll notice that everyone is muted here now. You won't be able to unmute yourself. And also, excuse me, also, we have the chat disabled to a certain degree, so that doesn't come up on everyone's screen. So it'll just come up to me. So we're hoping at the end to open it up to the floor and have a few questions for Rod. And if you have any questions you want to, if you have a question you want to ask, just message in the chat there. It will go to me, and we'll go from there. All right. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Terry.
All right. I guess everybody can hear me now. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
I think that is good. Just my name is Terry Chater. For those of you that know me, good. For those of you that don't, I've just been involved with Newfoundland Rugby for, I guess, 25 plus years, and just been around a long time. And I guess somebody considered that I had a gift for gab, I guess. So I'll just start with some, as Liam already said, we got a couple of special guests. I'm just going to start, first of all, introducing the man in the hot seat tonight. Many of you guys will remember him. He's a former Dogs Rugby football clubber. He's a Canadian U21 and U23 international. He's earned 62 caps playing for his country, including 4 World Cups, 95, 99, 2003, 2007. He's a former Newport Rugby footballer and a Hall of Famer. He's also played for the Gwent Dragons. He's Canadian Rugby champion while playing with the Rock for three consecutive, or not 2 consecutive, and another provincial and national championships. He's the only guy I know that's actually #1 in the program and #1 in the hearts. Some people know him around the country as the Cod. We know him here as the Rod. I'm going to introduce him. Welcome, Mr. Rod Snow.
Thanks, Terry. Quite an introduction. Thanks, Al. Thanks, Liam, for organizing this, Terry for taking it on, and Al for being a special guest. Looking forward to what's going to unfold.
Yeah, no, and as we said, we got another special guest, and I'm going to introduce him as well, just to make sure that he gets in here early, because I'm sure he's going to be part of most of these conversations as we go ahead. So some of you may know him. He's a former Ottawa Irish. He's earned 76 caps for his country. He's a decorated professional playing in both England and France. He's a Hall of Famer, both provincially and also in the Rugby Canada Hall of Fame. And most prestigiously, he's a World Rugby Hall of Famer. He's carried the Canadian national team on his back more than once, but everybody in Newfoundland will know him from carrying Mike Yetman's bags across the Toronto Pearson Airport. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for having him here, Mr. Al Sharon. Al, thanks for coming out, bud.
My pleasure to be here.
So anyways, we're just going to jump right into it because we do have two very good guests here. And again, thanks guys for coming in. So Rod, let's just pass over to you. Rod, tell us a little bit about your time growing up in Newfoundland, just as you got introduced to rugby. Obviously, you played a lot of sports growing up, but a quick introduction to rugby and kind of off you went. Just take us through that time when you kind of joined rugby and bring us up to probably like right around your first U21 type of and U23 Canadian national experience.
Yeah, well, my first bit of exposure to rugby actually happened in Labrador City. I lived up there from the time I was probably 4 or 5 years old till I was, I think, about 14. And we had a physical education teacher who was from Ontario. Doug Hammond is his name, who has a son, Lucas Hammond, in the national program right now. Well, Doug was my PE teacher for, I think, at least 1 year. And he brought a rugby ball and introduced us to the game in Labrador City at that stage. We never had any rugby field. It was basically a gravel parking lot behind the house that we used. And that was my first bit of exposure to rugby. Then when I moved to Newfoundland at 15 years old, I moved to Mount Pearl and was walking down the road one day and saw some kids playing rugby. And basically that was the beginning. I wouldn't say the beginning of the end, but not far off the beginning of the end, but the beginning of a great career. And I think about 16 or 17 years old, I was doing okay with ice hockey. I had a specific skill set that might have given me the ability to move on past hockey here in Newfoundland. And at the same time, I kind of got the bug for the sport of rugby. And at about 17 or 18 is kind of when I focused on the sport and thought this is something I can probably take to a higher level. And that's where my focus went from that point on.
So yeah, so you joined, so you kind of left Newfoundland, not left Newfoundland, but you kind of joined into that Canadian national program at the U21 level, right?
That's right. I played in the under-19 championships here in Newfoundland and various under-19 championships, but never really made the Canadian team at any of those levels. My first exposure with the national team was Canada under-21, and then again at under-23.
So under-21, I know you mentioned before, I think you said the Cairns tour. Was that U21? Is that what?
The Cairns tour was actually right in the middle. That was a full national team tour, but it didn't have a lot of our cap players. We had some cap players, but it was mostly a development team. I think Al was on that tour as one of the older role models at the time. So that was sandwiched right between the under-21 and under-23. But that was my first real tour with the full national team.
Right. And so there's an age difference between you and Al, though, right? Al, you're just a couple years older than Rod, correct?
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm a good 4 or 5 years older than Rod. I'll be 54 in July. So
okay, cool. No, I'm just trying to get the alignment here of when you guys might have crossed paths on the national level. So Rod, you basically transitioned on the, I guess, from Newfoundland rugby, you kind of moved right up into the Canadian program at the U21 level. Then it transitioned into the U23 level. What kind of for when you play for Canada at U23, what kind of games were you getting at that point? Were you doing a lot of travel or?
At that stage, no, they were both tours. My first tour at under-21 was a tour to the US where we played 2 test matches. That was it. It was just the one series. And then in under-23, it was a tour of Japan where I think we played 2 tests against Japan, plus I think we played 3 or 4 more games against national teams, not national teams, but university teams and club teams. And that was a big experience as a kid from Newfoundland, not having traveled at that stage significantly to take a trip to Japan and spend basically a month there was a big moment for me. And if I hadn't been hooked, that kind of trip really got me there.
Yeah.
Who are some of the guys on that tour that went on to play the senior level with you, Rod, on that tour?
At the senior level, I don't think there were a lot. I remember a captain at the time was a guy named Callum McIntosh. He was a back row guy, great player, great guy. From the team that went on, I would say I'm probably the only guy. I'm sure I'll hear it tomorrow if I got this wrong, but I'm probably the only guy who transitioned to the national team at that stage. And for what it's worth, I think the national team at that stage was probably the deepest, in my opinion, it had ever been. And probably probably one of the hardest Canadian national teams to make, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, at that point then for sure, I mean, we were competitive on the world stage really at that point. So transition, so you get into that under 23 level, you do those tours, you come back, you're basically now pushing your way into the senior men's program at the time. And we've had conversations in the past about this, and I don't think I know how remarkable the transition actually was for you to move, because everybody, especially when we grew up here, we knew you as a back row player. You had a quick transition from back row to front row, and not just a quick transition as in you went and spent 12 months at practices going from back row to front row. You went from playing back row at a U23 level to playing international senior men's rugby within a short period of time. You want to just talk a little bit about how that was and how you adjusted to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up playing in the back row, and that's really where I saw myself, and that was kind of a goal for me to play in the back row. I enjoyed the position, thought I was pretty good at it, but I mean, I didn't really have the physical skill set at 5'11". I was a heavy guy. I still had decent speed for a back row player, and my fitness level was decent, but I mean, I couldn't crack the back row that we had at the time, which were guys like Glenn Ennis, Al Sharon, Gordon McKinnon. Ian Gordon was there. I mean, it was a pretty studly back row, and I wasn't getting much of a look in. But as you know, we're traveling with the Canadian team. We don't travel with large squads. The opportunity came on the Cairns tour, and when Canada played the Test series against France. I'm going to say, I'll correct me if I'm wrong, that was probably around 91, 92, or 93 in Canada.
For the Cairns tour, you say?
No, not Cairns. When we played France, when Canada played France in the
France, that was
last send-off game.
1994 in Ottawa.
Right, 1994 in Ottawa. So in all that time, I mean, I'm not getting a look in the back row, but every time there is a scrummaging session, the guys want to do live scrummaging because it's obviously much more functional in terms of learning and getting more competitive to prepare for a game than using a scrum machine. Somebody had to go in and complete the front row. You always carried at that stage an extra prop, an extra hooker, but in order to scrummage live, you had to have somebody else step in. So at 5'10", probably 240 pounds in the back row, I was the obvious choice. So I went in, and you know what? I was able to survive, and I had a number of players come to me, particularly from the back row, because I think they had other things on their mind, saying, you know what, you should really move to the front row. And some of the front row guys were saying, you should give us some serious consideration. If you can learn the prop and learn the technique, I mean, the world is potentially your oyster, with the speed you have and the level of fitness. There's a good chance if you can learn to scrummage, which let's face it, is the key, most important thing for a prop to be able to do. If you can learn that, then the world is your oyster sort of thing. And I was a little bit taken back by it at first. There's nothing worse than, having your heart and mind set on one goal of playing for Canada in the back row. At one stage, you've got to acknowledge the fact that it's probably not going to happen. Swallowing my pride and biting the bullet and deciding that, yeah, you know what, I'm going to give this front row thing a try was obviously probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Other than Beth.
Oh yeah, other than my wife. Thanks, Al. So I basically made that decision, and that was 94. I was still in the back row at that stage. And as you know, the World Cup in 95, I had one tour.
Rod, can I just cut you off there for a second before you go into the World Cup? You did say, you touched upon it, and that was certainly true about the back row. The back row was pretty strong, but at the same time, we could tell that Rod was a really skilled player, but he was ferocious, and he looked like he might be coming after a position. So we were just saying, hey, listen, we're a little short in the front row, so I think you really could make it in the front row, Rod. So that was the back row really was, as Rod alluded to, was trying to help not only ourselves out, but help the team out by making sure, giving that gentle push towards the front row. And well, thank God he did. But it's not to say that Rod couldn't have played in the back row for Canada. Like he said, he was very quick, and he was very fast and fit, strong. Certainly a little deprived in the height department, but certainly players of his stature or his height certainly have gone on to play international rugby in the back row. But we were somewhat short in the front row, and as Rod said, he stepped up and he was definitely correct in saying there's no one else in the back row, whether they're starters or reserves, could have gone in and played at hooker or prop like Rod did initially in the scrummaging training sessions that we had, and then eventually went on to play. And I believe, Rod, I think you got your first cap as hooker for Canada, right?
I did, yeah. So that was 94, and basically I ended up playing in the 95 World Cup, all the pool games, having gotten 2 caps before that. First one against Argentina as a hooker. Never played that position in my life. My first cap, and then my second cap against New Zealand as prop. So, you know, at 94 I was playing in the back row. 95 I was propping at the World Cup. So it was a baptism of fire, as they say. Had to be a quick study.
Now, Al, we can bring you into all this, Al, because I'm pretty sure at some point you play front row.
I did, but thank God it was on contested scrums against South Africa. Thank God for that. I mean, listen, I don't think people properly appreciate how difficult it is for a person to go from playing back row to playing in the front row. And it's one thing to do that at the club level or maybe at the provincial level, to play at international level and essentially do it in a World Cup. And, you know, we went up against Romania, which is always tough scrummagers, Australia, defending World Cup champions, and in South Africa, the eventual World Cup champions in '95. And Rod was very strong in the scrums and just got by. You know, he's learned over the years technique for sure, but he just got by on just, you know, pure toughness and strength, and a full credit to him for sure. An amazing accomplishment to do that in such a quick transition from one position to another.
Yeah, I think there's one piece that I'd kind of like to just to reiterate with respect to playing in the front row. Physically, I had the strength, I had the stamina. I think I had the tools physically to do it. And it's funny, I as a young athlete, I'd never spend much time on mental preparation and the mental side of the game. But I remember, and Al will remember this because he was involved in all those camps as well. We had a sports psychologist that would travel and work with the Canadian team named David Cox. And at first, being younger, I guess, and immature, I didn't think that just thinking the game, you could learn the game. But I eventually, after having so many tough days in scrummage practice and so many tough games in scrummage practice, I finally thought that, you know what, my body physically can't take the pounding it's taking trying to learn. So I bought in the whole idea that if your mind can visualize it, your body can do it. So I did practice the mental training and the mental imagery, specifically with respect to scrummaging. And for about a year and a half, I spent a lot of time just in my hotel room, mentally rehearsing scrums over and over in my mind that obviously physically wouldn't take any toll on my body. It was mentally tiring and mentally fatiguing, but again, you can recover from that quite quick as opposed to, 100 live scrummages. Your body doesn't recover. I think had I not realized that and bought into the whole mental aspect of rehearsal, I don't think I ever would have got to the stage I did as prop, because as I said, 14 months to learn the position would have been impossible had I not kind of focused on that side, the mental aspect of preparing yourself to play.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Rob, because obviously there's at some point being an athlete the way that you were gifted physically and athletically. There comes a point, obviously, when you make the decision that this is what you want to do in your life, you're obviously at some point got to make those type of decisions. And as a professional, that's probably one of the best decisions you probably ever made, to focus on it in that point, right? I got to talk about that first cap that you had, because go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just too bad that David Cox, the sports psychologist, didn't talk to Rod about his after game training sessions in the bar. He'd talked to him about that, and Rod prepared mentally for that. Maybe a little less carnage from our tours for sure.
Listen, he was too busy. He's too busy concentrating on things in his hotel room pregame. He does postgame that's all off the.
I needed to relax.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to go back because I know your first cap was against Argentina, correct?
Correct.
And Argentina, actually, I do remember the 95 World Cup, that front row, and we talked about this of Corral, Mendez, and Noriega, right?
correct? Yeah.
They went on, I do believe, in the 95 World Cup. I mean, I remember they pushed England around the pitch in their game. They actually were, I think, named the top front row probably in the World Cup for 95. Your very first game was like that year or just within that build up to the World Cup, scrummaging against the best front row probably in the world at that time. That had to be, I mean, trial by fire is an understatement.
Yeah. No,
Very true.
that's true. I can remember, I mean, I was still practicing a prop when we were in Argentina, and we were very concerned about that front row. And, you know, myself, Danny, or Eddie, Danny Jackett or Eddie Evans, one of us was going to have to sit on the bench for that game. And I think the coaching staff got together and thought, you know what? There's nothing more demoralizing than getting nailed in the scrums. We got to be able to combat that. And I think the answer to combating that was to go with the 3 prop front row, which obviously has its risks, particularly with respect to the lineout. But that's what we decided to do. And, you know, we didn't lose any scrums that day. We were under pressure the whole day. And I can tell you that I probably never felt pressure like that in my life. And anybody who's played in the front row will appreciate it. You've got a ton of pressure behind you, a ton of pressure in front of you. And you know that if you breathe or move the wrong way, your spine is just it's going to collapse either in or down or up. Both are less than desirable, to say the least. So that was, but at the same time, it was a huge challenge, and there was a ton of pressure, and it was difficult, but it was a massive learning experience. And I said many times in my life that, you know, when you're in battles like that, when you're under pressure constantly, there's such a great opportunity to learn. Not that you always want to be in that position, but those are the sort of moments, I think, in times that either make you or break you. And I survived it and enjoyed it at the same time. And I think after that, I mean, every scrum got better to the point where it was the other side of my career when I knew it was time to kind of hang them up.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, not only did I think your first cap was Argentina, second cap was New Zealand, third cap was South Africa, and then kind of just jumped into the World Cup type thing.
Yeah, well, so yeah, exactly. It wasn't far off that. I think, well, I can remember the first 5. It was Argentina, New Zealand, Romania, Australia, South Africa. So those were probably my, you know, 5 of my first 20 or 30 games, or probably less than 20 or 30, probably 10 to 12 games of prop.
Right. So you're not getting domestic rugby at prop. You're getting World Cup rugby experience prior.
Right. We played obviously some domestic stuff against provincial teams and against club teams, but as you can imagine, it doesn't prepare you for the sort of pressure and intensity of scrums against teams at that level.
I can't imagine. And to me, it's just to talk about it. I mean, we're talking about those 5 caps. But again, 14 months prior to that, the transition to go from a back row to an international front row during that time is beyond amazing athletically. So that kudos to you on that. But let's push on now. I want to push on. So you got those. So it's a good transition into where you're to. I want to push on to the 95 World Cup. It's probably one of the most well-known World Cups. I mean, there's been a lot of there's been movies made about this World Cup. Invictus is obviously one of the rugby movies made around this World Cup. There was a lot of political turmoil going on in South Africa during that time. Nelson Mandela was in jail 28 years, let go, president. He donned a Springboks jersey and hat during the World Cup, which was kind of frowned upon by half of the population of South Africa. Just going into that World Cup, I mean, I know it after the fact because I guess social media is not evident at the time. And, if you're not reading newspapers and books, you probably won't hear about it. Going into that World Cup, did you know what was happening at the time?
I don't think I think I had a good idea of what was happening, but I don't think you can truly appreciate it and understand it until you live it and you get there. We had an understanding of, the social issues and turmoil in South Africa at the time, but at the same time, we knew the country and as a nation, they were trying to turn it around and put on a more complimentary face to the rest of the world. So they worked very hard at the World Cup. And I guess what's interesting is that obviously I lived South Africa during the World Cup, but I also lived South Africa after the World Cup when I stayed to play for Eastern Province. So I think they did put on a brave face for the World Cup, ended up winning the World Cup. And there was so much positivity that came out of it. But in my opinion, after the World Cup, it probably went back to to closer to what it was before the World Cup. And I think it's gradually gotten better, since then for sure. But there's no doubt, going there, you couldn't really fathom the atmosphere that you're going to be able to expose yourself to playing in that World Cup. Just thinking about it before you got there, I remember the first game we played at Bodo Erasmus Stadium against Romania. It was an electric atmosphere. They loved the rugby, and it was really was an experience to behold. But of course, nothing would ever compare to the intensity of the South African game, which was our last full game in the World Cup.
So I'll go to that Romania game. I think there was a couple of tries scored in those games. You don't know who scored those, do you?
I'm pretty sure, Al, you score one?
I did.
I think I scored one.
Al, I don't know. Do you know who scored the other one, Al? I don't know.
Rod scored the first one.
No way. Jeez.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw it on Twitter, I think today.
Yeah, mine was your standard 5-meter rumble to the line. And Al's, I think yours started in our own half. It was an amazing, one of the best tries in the World Cup, I thought. Started somewhere around with lots of hands, and I think Al scored on the wing.
It was just a counterattack by Dave Lougheed, who I believe passed to Scott Stewart, and then I think Christian Stewart was involved, Winston Stanley was involved, and then I was fortunate to be on the receiving end just to cross the line. So that was, it was a nice try by our backs, and full credit to Ian Burwell, because that was stuff that we worked on in training to work back to get into position to support when the team we're playing against kicks back to us. So it came to fruition in the game like it did in the training session when it's on the post, so to speak. So that was a nice one, and it got us off to a good start in that World Cup with a strong win against Romania. And I believe our score against Romania was a bigger one that day than what South Africa and Australia would have put up against them in the matches to follow. So that was one feather in our cap, I guess.
And that World Cup was, I mean, I don't think you can compare it to now, I guess, because you were pretty competitive against Australia at the time. I don't know, but it was maybe a 10 or 15 point differential, right? I can't remember the exact score.
26-10.
Well, yeah. So you're only talking 16 points. I mean, nowadays it might be a bit more than that, just based on, and that we'll get to that eventually. And that's, that all changes around professionalism of rugby, and there's probably a gradualization in that. But so you go in there, you play Romania, you lose a close one to Australia. I consider it close. That's a pretty decent score line.
It was a close game.
It was a close game, right? So New
Zealand.
Sorry, go ahead.
New Zealand team management actually called our management at our hotel, and just to say that the New Zealand squad had watched that match and they were very impressed with how the game went. And of course, they were cheering for Canada against Australia based on that rivalry. But that was kind of cool that they would take the time to do that, and it meant a lot to our players, because we can talk about this later. But prior to that World Cup, in Rod's second test against New Zealand, we got absolutely crushed. New Zealand put up a basketball score, and we put up a score of
soccer score.
Well, not a soccer score. It was an NHL 70s game, NHL game from the 80s, I guess. We scored 7 points, and I think New Zealand put up 70 some points on us. So that was devastating for us, and that was an eye opener, and it certainly got us in tune to get ready for the World Cup. And we had a lot of things to correct, and we corrected a lot of those in those games coming World Cup. But that was one of those matches against New Zealand that we don't like to remember too fondly.
No, I don't suspect, especially as a build up, right?
No.
It's tough to build up. That's a build down.
Yeah, it was a build up from hell, really. We played Fiji, and then less than 7 days later, we were playing New Zealand. So we played Fiji in like tropical heat, and then we played New Zealand, and it was New Zealand was just coming off their trial match, so it was all the guys there were busting the show that they were really deserved their spot in the World Cup, and they were full throttle that day, and we were on the bad end of that scoreline.
Yeah. So again, going back to the 95 World Cup. So Rod, you obviously, this is kind of like probably, maybe I'm wrong, 1,000th time you're probably going to tell this story, but we're going to get it to it because it's during that World Cup playing in South Africa. We have, and I'm not going to call it an incident because I don't like the term incident. It was just a little skirmish that happened, and they put a name on it after, and I'm going to pronounce it, and I'm going to pronounce it right. It's the Battle of Boot Amaris.
Close, Boot Erasmus.
Boot Erasmus. Boot is Boot.
I know it because I stayed there and played. That was my home
Boot
stadium.
Erasmus.
Stay there, but
They call it the Battle of Boot Erasmus. So you're playing South Africa. It's the last day. You're playing South Africa. It's obviously a must win for South Africa, I think, at that point, right?
yeah, I don't think it was a must win because they beat Australia. They'd won their previous 2 games. I think for seeding and that it might have had some, but I think that having won 2 games, they didn't want to lose to Canada at home. They didn't want to lose to anybody at home. And I think that they could have disregarded this before the tournament started, but after watching the 2 results we had, I think they were a little bit nervous about it. And I think if you don't know much about South African rugby, what you should know is that they take every game as an opportunity, in my opinion, to establish dominance and use their bravado and their size and their strength to kind of bully you into submission. Mm-hmm. Yeah, their more recent teams have changed a little bit, but back then, that was their go-to. They just wanted to be able to physically beat people up to the point where they were able to play some rugby and win a game. And I think that played into Canada's hands. I mean, I think if we had a chance to beat them, that was the sort of game we needed to play. So it did play into our hands. I think if it had just been purely a rugby game, even though we had some good rugby players, we probably didn't have as many good rugby players as South Africa had. But I know the build-up that day, there was kind of there was an air and anticipation the whole day that there was something big going to happen that evening. And it's funny, I can remember lying in my hotel room on the bed and I had a phone call. And the gentleman says, hi, is this Rod? I said, yeah. He said, you know who I am? I said, no, I have no idea. He goes, I'm the guy who introduced you to rugby in Labrador City. I'm like, what, really? He said, yeah, it's Doug Hammond. He said, I'm here in South Africa now teaching with the Salvation Army. I said, you got to be kidding. So it's kind of, I thought that it all meant something at the time. And I remember carrying that into the game, thinking that, you know, that the guy who introduced me to the game is, he wasn't at the game that night. He was elsewhere in South Africa watching, but it just meant something to be able to play for somebody like that. But I remember when the game started, and now I'm sure Al remembers as well. It's, you know, it's a packed house, as you can imagine, in a pretty good sized stadium. And we're warming up. It's a night game. And of course, the power goes, the lights go out. Right. And within probably 20 or 30 seconds of the lights going out, there's like choppers in the air with spotlights down on the field. And we're like, what the hell is going on here now? And so we stayed on the field until our security guard came on and said, guys, you guys got to get off the field right away. So we went to change rooms. And we basically did what we could do to wait for the game to start and try and stay focused, try and stay motivated. And so we were ready to hit the ground running. And we found out after that, you know, there was nothing more than a power failure. Nobody really knows, and there's some surmise and speculation as to what happened, but it was just a power failure. South Africa's dressing room seemed to be much more prepared for the power failure than ours was. So that was playing on our minds at the time as well. And right from the first whistle, I mean, you hear all the kind of expressions about rugby. That it's not a contact sport; it's a combat sport, and there are games that's absolutely true. It's hand-to-hand combat. And that game against South Africa was that. I think right from the very first kickoff, whenever there's an opportunity, and I don't mind saying this, and I would speak to any South African about it, and many of them became my friends after the fact. But every time there was a chance to throw an elbow, throw a dig, throw a knee, throw a late hit, shoulder where it didn't belong, it happened. And frankly, it happened on both sides. So the game, in my opinion, was bound to boil over at some stage, particularly from the fact that we were keeping it close. The only tries scored in that game were 2 pushover tries. And I think, Al, you played second row that day, whereas normally you're back row. We had Glenn Ennis.
Second row.
Played second row as well. I think Mike James was out with a broken arm. Gareth Rowlands was out with a broken bone, another second row. We ended up with 2 back rows in the second row. I don't know if having second rows that day that specialize in the position would have saved us in the scrums, but had it saved us in the scrums, you know, they basically don't score any tries. The only tries they scored were those 2 pushovers. And it was a ferocious game up until the point where, and I watched the video from time to time where, one of their guys tackles our guys into the advertising boards.
Winston Stanley.
And it was a Hendricks, tackle him in there. Of
Yeah.
course, Scotty runs in, Scott Stewart, and then it all breaks out. And I can remember kind of being one of the last ones to get there. But I remember running in, and as I was getting close to it, kind of sizing everything up where everybody is. And I guess coming from Newfoundland and coming from Canada with a hockey background and the hockey kind of background I had, I mean, I wasn't really too worried about it. I thought if I can survive the scrums where I'm totally inexperienced, if there's a brawl going on in there, I feel like that might be my wheelhouse where I can have some success. So I was going to get in there and do what I could to help my teammates. And as I was getting in there, their second row, a guy named Hannah Stridham, kind of grabbed me around my neck, and I was able to turn him around, and we ended up going on the ground. And anyway, lots of stuff happened after that. And as we know, when the dust settled, David McHugh called myself and Gareth and James Dalton in, and obviously sent us all off the field. I look at the video and I'm kind of in disbelief that I'm getting sent off, not because I felt like I didn't do anything to deserve to get sent off. I just thought that maybe the guy I was messing around with and fighting with, he should have been sent off too. But obviously the referees and linesmen didn't see it that way. And I think in the big scheme of things, it didn't end up meaning much, other than the fact that James Dalton, as you know, got sent off. Him getting sent off, and this kind of goes back to, if I can wind these two stories together, the movie Invictus. Obviously, Chester Williams was South Africa's poster child before the World Cup. Their first colored player, a fabulous player, pulls a hamstring 6 weeks before the World Cup, and he's out. They don't have a poster child for their South African dream of winning the World Cup anymore. Of course, he doesn't play in the World Cup, but with James Dalton being sent off and not able to play beyond that, they get the opportunity to bring one more player back into the squad. Of course, this is another 4 weeks, or 3 weeks in any case, after the World Cup squad is announced. So they can then bring Chester back into the fold for the playoffs. Yeah, for the quarterfinals. And as you know, he went on to have a big role. So, I mean, I would argue, well, if it wasn't for me and you and the rest of our Canadian teammates, Chester never gets in the World Cup. And who knows, it might have been different. So possibly the South Africans owe us a little debt of gratitude for our part in that melee.
I wrote the director of the movie a letter saying, at least put the guys under credits, hey?
Yeah, there you go.
No, but you make a primary example there, because that is a big part of that South African team, and Chester Williams coming back into that team and eventually winning the World Cup and being the only colored South African at the time playing. And I mean, it was a big deal. And obviously that whole incident, I mean, he probably may not have played in that World Cup, but again, I don't like to call it an incident, because that nowadays it is what it is. And at that time, then, like you said, that skirmish is on YouTube, but it's like one camera pointing from right up here. If that was 2018, you'd have 18 cameras. You can't lie about what happened. You can't say stuff happened on the ground, because everybody would know what happened.
And that's right. And obviously professionalism started the day that World Cup ended, and then the game changed forever. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was pretty interesting. The term battle, I mean, it was a little skirmish, really. I mean, it is what it is, but it ended up being something that in the history of things, it's pretty interesting, pretty cool to be part of, actually, at the end of the day. And I always say, because Gareth Reese got red carded as well, and I don't care what he says is the greatest red card he ever got in his life.
Yeah, but he didn't even land the punch that he threw.
He took one and he was done.
Right. He came full. I mean, because the brawl kind of stopped and started, and then Gareth actually, to his full credit, he saw Scott Stewart get sucker punched from behind, a really cheap punch, and so Gareth came running in to defend him with a flying hook, which completely missed, and he fell to the ground, and they started putting the boots to him. So I actually jumped on Gareth, because I couldn't throw punches in that, because I was already on the warning for slapping Pienaar earlier in the match. But kind of what Rod said. I mean, it was a tough match. It was, the match that it would be my top two toughest, hardest matches I've ever played in internationally. And the video doesn't, I mean, everyone sees the fight, but, and if you watch the match itself, it doesn't really show itself about how tough it was, because just the camera just doesn't pick up on what's going on out there. It was, you know, it was a hard match and tough, violent at times. And as Rod said, you know.
Oh, did we lose Al? You guys got me? Rod, I can still hear you. You can hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, we lost Al there. Maybe hopefully he'll reconnect. But I mean, that's pretty impressive for Al to say out of all the international games that he played, that was probably in the top two toughest, eh?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I don't know how else I would rank it either. It's got to be one of the toughest, physically most challenging games I've ever been a part of, for sure.
And being in that World Cup in South Africa as well. I mean, obviously they had a point to prove, and it being a politically motivated point as well. It's got to be a lot of pressure on that team too, as well. As much as they may have been dirty, there's a lot of pressure on that team in that World Cup.
That's right.
So anyway, so we'll move on from there. So you finish up that World Cup, and this is really the pinnacle now of, I guess, the pivotal point when you basically become a professional rugby player, correct?
Yeah, exactly. After that World Cup, there was a lot of talks of how the game was going to go professional. Nobody really had a firm handle on how it was going to happen. There were big media moguls like Kerry Packer who had plans, and other wealthy some of the world's wealthiest guys who had plans on how they were going to turn the game professional. But I knew that if any country had an opportunity to turn the game professional, it would have been South Africa. When I had an opportunity to stay and play for Eastern Province after that World Cup, after I served my 60-day ban, and I signed a contract, obviously, to play with Eastern Province. So after the World Cup, I basically came home, kind of got my affairs in order, and when my ban was served, I returned to Eastern Province to play for them in the Currie Cup, which is kind of a small tournament. It's only a 6-game tournament, 5 games actually against the other 5 provincial teams. And I think it was a necessary part of my professional development, my development as a rugby player, and I certainly learned a lot. But I mean, in terms of an experience, the time that I had there wasn't enjoyable from a rugby perspective. I got there, the coach that recruited me was a guy named Garth Wright, very good, famous South African scrum half. He was the coach at the time. And after I got there, within the first 2 or 3 weeks, he got fired, lost his position, and they hired a new coach, who was a guy named Johan Klates, who was an Afrikaans guy. He just didn't see Canadians or foreign players being a part of, at least in my opinion, didn't see foreign players being a part of South African rugby. And my experience took a turn for the worst at that stage. When he took over the coaching reins, I mean, all the practices went from being in English and Afrikaans, where I could understand and hear what was going on, to being purely in Afrikaans. And obviously I was at an absolute loss, disadvantage to try and keep up with what was going on because of that. And I remember I got dropped for the next game after Johan took over, and through an injury, I managed to get back in the squad, and I played in all the rest of the games because of the nature of an injury. But I'm not sure that would have happened hadn't there been the injury. So it was a learning experience. I mean, even though I was there for, I guess, probably 4 months, it was a great opportunity to, practicing and the live scrummaging was an invaluable opportunity, and getting the amount of game time that I did have as a sub off the bench with that team was a great learning opportunity too. Was it one of those enjoyable things? Was it what I had with the Canadian national team, or my time in Newport, where I can only say good things? It definitely wasn't one of those feel-good rugby experiences, but I think in terms of my overall development, it was very important. And I got to meet a lot of great people, great friends. One of the other young guys on the team at that time was a guy named Alistair Coetzee, or Tootie, and he went on to coach South Africa for many years. And he was a great guy at the time, great friend of mine at the time, colored guy as well. So for him to accomplish that as a player in Eastern Province and to go on to coach the national team is pretty impressive.
Was that something that, so after that World Cup where I guess the turn of professionalism were you getting offers, or was this the first thing that came across your plate at the time, or?
No, that was the first thing that came across my plate because obviously the World Cup, I'm going to say, I think it ended in April or May, somewhere around there. Of course, South Africa at the time was going into their Currie Cup season, whereas I think in the rest of the Europe, it was their off season. So if you were going to play right after the World Cup, the Southern Hemisphere is basically where you were going to do it. I think I got the time frames right. So yeah, I did sign, Kerry Packer was the guy who promoted the league at the time, an Australian billionaire. And I did sign a contract. I think it was called Super something rugby. And I think I did sign a 1-year contract. And of course, after that, by the time I finished up in South Africa, there was an opportunity to play and make a move to Newport. Gareth Rees was at Newport at the time as the number 10. And I spoke to him several times on the phone, and I knew the opportunity existed. And of course, that's how kind of the path was laid to make my way to Newport.
Right. So you actually, yeah, soon after that, you moved to Newport, which is a good point. And I forgot that Gareth Rees was actually at Newport before you, because I was going to ask you leading up to that, how did you manage to go to Newport? But that's an excellent point. So Gareth's already there, kind of convinced everybody that I got a guy to come over and it's going to blow your mind, right? And so you get offered a contract from Newport, but that wasn't as easy as just going over and getting off the plane, was it?
No, not at all. Not at all. As I said, at that game, the game hadn't really had a firm grasp on professionalism and how it was going to happen. Were there players getting paid to play in Britain in 1995? Yes, absolutely. But in terms of players who had official status as professional players in 1995, they hadn't worked out the details of that yet. And I can remember when I was traveling over to Newport, I negotiated a contract with them. And as I was getting ready to go, they said, don't take your contract. And when you get to customs, and this is from the executive at Newport, Campbell Black, I can remember he said, just tell him you're going to visit some friends. Don't tell him anything else. So anyway, I get to customs, and the guy opens up my passport. He says, oh, I see you traveled quite a bit for the sport of rugby, and you're at the World Cup in '95. I said, yeah. He said, what do you plan on doing while you're here? I said, I'm just visiting some friends. He goes, you going to play any rugby while you're here? I said, no, I don't think so. Didn't have any boots with me. He said, do you mind if we have a look through your bag? And I said, sure, no problem. And I had a contract in my bag, but I thought I had it hidden. This was never going to be found where I had it hidden. I had this false compartment in the bottom of my rugby bag I thought I had. So anyway, they go through my bag, and I'm watching them go through it. He's getting deeper and deeper, and I'm getting more nervous. In Heathrow Customs. Anyway, he reaches under this little flap and pulls out this contract and goes, what's this? I said, man, I think that's what you're looking for. So anyway, he says, okay, come with me. He sticks me in a room. I'm there for probably 10 hours. Newport's, the people they've sent from the executive to meet me are down waiting. I'm texting, or not texting at that stage, phoning them, telling them what's happening. They said, okay, just hang tight. Anyway, the guy comes back in the room. He says, you're not allowed in the country. He said, we don't have any flights back to Canada for 24 hours, but the flight that you're getting on is this exact same flight tomorrow morning, returning. So you've got, at that stage, less than 24 hours. I arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had to leave at noon the next day. I didn't get out of customs till about 6 p.m. So I got out of customs. I went straight to Eton, where Gareth was teaching at the time, Eton College in just outside London. And spent the night with Gareth, and then I got on a plane back to Newfoundland the next morning. And at that stage, we went through the formal process of getting a work permit for the purpose of playing rugby as a professional sport. And it took way longer. This was probably August, September. I didn't get my work permit through until I think almost the middle of December. I got there just before Christmas. And I remember at the time, it took so long because there had been no professional rugby players, at least in terms of professional rugby players in the country, that were officially professional. Lots of domestic players that were getting paid, but nobody that came through customs in an official channel where they were designated as a pro rugby player.
So that's, yeah, that was pretty interesting. I guess that's a life lesson there in terms of, don't lie at customs.
Don't lie at customs. They were
They'll know if you're lying.
Pretty good about it when it was all said and done.
So you go over to, obviously you got a bit of an idea of because I really find it interesting going to Newport and playing rugby in Newport. Obviously, at the time, I knew nothing really about Newport. I'm not going to sit here and say I know an extraordinary amount about Newport, but now, you played there. Simon's here. His brother Dean is here. So I kind of get a little bit about the historics of that club, and that club, Newport club, dates back probably 140, almost close on 145 years at this point. So you go over there, you play. Did you? I mean, being part of Rugby Canada and the Canadian national team and all those things, when you go over to a place like Newport, I guess you don't realize when you first go there, but after a while you say, man, this club is old. It's nostalgic. It's one of the oldest clubs and I'm assuming in Wales, probably maybe a broader area. When did it really dawn on you when you went over there as a professional, like not only were you playing professional rugby, but you're playing for a pretty historic club over there?
Yeah, and I think it's hard to ignore that. I see a couple of people from Newport on the call here now, and they're certainly aware of what I'm going to say. But as you walk into the club, and there's these boards all over the place that list Newport's achievements by year, starting right back. I think they go back as far as the late 1800s or early 1900s for sure. And you see, where there's a 4-year gap during World War I, where there was no rugby played. And the names of all the captains, some of them have the little invincible tag by their name, where they had an undefeated season. So they have rooms in their clubhouse that are like museums, and the tribute to rugby. And so yeah, if it was lost on me, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it didn't take me long after I got there to understand that the club is a famous club because it had it had connections to English rugby and to the Welsh Rugby Union. And it had been around such a long time. It has so many great Welsh international players and some English international players too. So it didn't take me long to kind of get a handle on that. This is a special place, and I had a special opportunity to embrace.
So you go over there, you play professional over there. I think you had 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
Yeah, so 10 years. So at any point during that 9 or 10 years, I mean, obviously there's times during any professional career that there might have been something tugging at you to go somewhere else, but you managed to pull out the 9 or 10 years and stay with the same club professionally, and at one point, and at some point, I don't know exactly what point, but you were in the top, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 props in the world at this point. And you managed to stick around with one club during 9 or 10 years. Any reason why that was?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first year I was there, I had a 1-year contract, and I had an opportunity to sign at that stage. I had an opportunity to go to England to a couple of different clubs. Spoke to a couple of different Welsh clubs as well, but I don't know. It's one thing. I guess I'd say I'm a kind of a fiercely loyal person when it comes to my rugby clubs. As you know, I played for the Dogs here locally, had lots of opportunities to play with other clubs, and some clubs obviously more fashionable, but I thought, no, I've committed to this team, I'm with this team. And for me, it was kind of like that with Newport. They'd give me a chance, and I had opportunities to go to England for certainly more money, obviously. But at the stage, I felt like I had a connection with the club at that stage, and I wanted to try it. So I ended up signing a 3-year deal at that stage, and played out the 3 years. When that 3-year deal was up, after being there for 4 years, the next contract is where I really had a lot of interest to go. I had an opportunity to go play with Wayne Smith. I think he was with Canterbury, New Zealand at the time. He was keen to have me go there, and I really wanted to try that. It would have been less money at that stage than I was earning in the UK. But I had opportunities to go to France and England for a lot more money. After 3 years, at that stage, my wife had a good job in the Gwent Hospital in Wales, so I had to factor that into it. She was well set up, enjoyed her job. I really enjoyed where I was, and I said no to a lot of dough to go elsewhere. But I felt like Newport was my place at the time, and one of the best decisions I ever made. And obviously I signed 2 more contracts after that. I think another 3-year, and then my final year was a 1-year contract. And that kind of rounded out my 10 years. But, you know, when you start these journeys, you never really know where you're going to end up. But for me, looking back on it, I certainly wouldn't change a thing with the way that unfolded.
Yeah, no, it's actually remarkable. And then we talked about the history of the club, and then, you know, and I think still to this day, in the 140-year history of that club, you're the top scoring prop in the history of that club, which is, you know, that's absolutely remarkable in itself. You
Yeah.
know,
You play on the wing most of the time.
Yes, just
What?
gonna say,
You play on the
It's a
wing
good-
most of the time.
well, yeah, well, we'll
it's a
get to
good
that
thing.
because we'll get to that because he's a game-winning winger, try scorer, and World Cup qualifier. So we'll get to that. But yeah, so the last thing I just want to base. Huh?
It's a good thing that most of these people, I'm looking around the screen and everybody is saying, yeah, but he was on the wing the whole time. I always thought my skills were wasted in the Bucks Malls. I figured I was better off out there.
So the last thing I just want to talk about your time in Newport was obviously you guys won the Welsh Cup. A lot of people may not know the significance of the Welsh Cup, but I guess playing with Newport, that is the prestigious, I guess, the cup to win playing for Newport. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the sport in Britain is obviously structured a little bit different than it is in North America. They have a cup championship, which involves clubs at all levels, the same way they do for football or soccer. And then they have a league championship. And then there's European championships, which came about a little bit later in the 10-year period I was there. But so there's 2 opportunities to win things in a year. The cup is a big one because even the minnows in the Welsh Rugby League have an opportunity to compete against the best clubs, depending on their draw, for an opportunity to be the best in the country. And I remember the year that we were able to win the cup. I know it was the first time Newport had won a cup in, I think, over 20 years. I had to check that, but it was a long time. It was a special time because we had a player at the time named Gary Teichmann, who would captain South Africa, an incredible gentleman, incredible man, an incredible rugby player as well, and one of the best captains I ever had, if not the best. And I'd have to mention, I guess, Gareth Rees and even Peter O'Flaherty in his guys who I thought were the best leaders I've ever played under.
I am on this call,
it was
Rod,
his-
just so.
Yeah, I know. Listen now, some of us are soldiers and warriors. The others are generals. You're the best warrior, but not necessarily the best captain. But anyway, the opportunity to play in that game, and like I say, it was Gary's swan song, and it felt like a special moment. And there was no way that game could have gone against Neath in the cup final, but a win for Newport. It was certainly a close, tough game, and we were able to run out eventual winners, which was a big thing for the town of Newport at the time, and for the rugby club, Newport Rugby Football Club.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's special times. I mean, especially when you're there, and like you said, that over that time they didn't win a cup championship in quite some time. So to be part of that, and not only are you part of it, I guess one of the big things that I always admire is these European clubs that take on these internationals and bring them in and take them in and treat them as their own. Because like you said, in South Africa, it was a little bit different. So, you know, you kind of got your guard up when you're going to Wales at the beginning, because you're like, oh, are these guys going to treat me the same as, right? But no, when you get it accepted with open arms, and like you said, you're as loyal as what you did. And Newport obviously honored you with your testimonial during the end of your career as well, which they don't do for every single player that just retires there. You know, that had to be pretty special as well.
It was, and to be honest, I would have thought the town and the management in certain ways welcomed me with open arms, but I can assure you the first year at Newport, practice was awful interesting. You know, my first foray into professional rugby was the Wild West of rugby at the time, and it was the same in South Africa. It was like hockey in North America, in Canada, in the 70s and 80s. It was a different game than it is now. So practice in those early days was you had to earn the respect of the players. You didn't just show up and have a Canadian tattoo on your leg and a 50 or 20 caps behind you, and all of a sudden you were the man of the team. No. You had to earn your time and earn your respect amongst those guys, and allowing you to do that really does make you feel like part of a team. So long before I got to the opportunity to have a testimonial, which was an incredible honor, I did have to I had some respect earned along the way, which which obviously makes you a better character and a better rugby player as well. But no, at the end of the 10 years, the opportunity to have a testimonial, I don't know how many guys have had that honor. I know not many before me. I think maybe at least one since, possibly. But it was an incredible honor, and it was nice. One of my most proudest moments, I'd say, in sport is the testimonial is obviously an opportunity to run various events where you can do funding in order to assist with your retirement, a gift when you leave the game from the club. What happened basically was the supporters club that year collected money after every game to donate to me. And when the season was done, they gave me a check for, I think it was £8,000 or £9,000, about $20,000. And I thought, you know what, guys, I can't take this. And I was proud as I've ever been in my life to be able to donate that to charity over there. It was a pretty significant donation. And I remember it was a testimonial game in the Millennium Stadium for Rob Howley and Scott Quinnell. They both had respective invitational teams to play against each other. And at halftime, I was able to donate the 20,000 Canadian dollars to the Welsh Charitables Organization, which is a fund for injured Welsh rugby players who come into hardship as a result of their injuries. So that was pretty special and probably one of my proudest moments. And without the testimonial that Newport was able to give me, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, for you to be able to take that money, because I know those testimonials are significantly held in your honor, and to basically give money back to you, or not held to give money, but they do present you with these type of opportunities, and for you to turn around and do that, obviously the people in Newport and the Newport Rugby Club actually, it just shows what a upstanding person you are, and I'm sure they appreciate it. And everything it did, and it's definitely a humbling experience for sure for you. Al, I just want to get you in here now, because during all this time that Rod played, so he left the '95 World Cup, he goes to South Africa, he plays over there, then he jots over with Gareth Rees, and he plays in Newport for a little while. During all this time, we got a bunch of World Cup happening in there. You and Rod played another couple World Cups. Usually, I can sit down here and have a full-on hour conversation with somebody who's played in one World Cup, and between the two of you, you have 8 World Cups, and in those you combined for you played together for 3 each, I believe it was, right? Do you want to elaborate, or you want to just jump in here, maybe ask Rod a few questions or anything about any of those World Cups or anything?
Yeah, I know. I suppose what I would say to Rod, or ask Rod, is what was your favorite World Cup, and maybe you could speak a bit on the differences between your first World Cup in '95 up until your last one in 2007.
Yeah, I mean, I had to be honest. My favorite World Cup was the South African World Cup. I think the significance of South Africa kind of entering the world stage, not just in the sport of rugby, but socially becoming a country that's wanted to be more responsible to the rest of the world, and moving away and abandoning apartheid. To be there at that time, I think, was special. And the rugby was, I wouldn't say secondary, but the rugby was almost like I was obviously the vehicle to get to a place like South Africa to be able to experience that. And as you know, South Africa winning that World Cup as their first foray back in the international rugby was a pretty special opportunity. Playing in some of the biggest stadiums in the world and the great crowds, the atmosphere was electric. As you know, when you travel with the national team, the security and the way you're treated in all these foreign countries is second to none. But I've never seen, I've never been treated, or South Africa, or Pierre Coetzee, our lead security guy, the former boxer. Yeah, it just, I'll never forget that guy. And he was our main security detail. And a lot of times that's the sort of thing that sticks with you. But I would say, yeah, my favorite World Cup was South Africa. My last World Cup, is that France or Australia?
Yeah,
France.
Yeah, you had a great translator in France, didn't you? On your World Cup in 2007, part of the management team.
Anyway,
he was handsome.
The last World Cup was actually '99. No, when was my last World Cup?
You were 2007 in France.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was my last World Cup.
It was memorable, yes.
It was memorable. I mean, it was well, yeah, no kidding. But to be honest, I remember I retired from professional rugby in 1995, or sorry, 2005. And, you know, I was out of the international game for basically 2 years. And, you know, I guess the national team, the national program at the time wasn't flush with, I guess, seasoned veterans or seasoned props, especially. Though I'd been playing rugby for the Rock at the time and playing a very good standard rugby in the National League. I mean, I wasn't, in my opinion, I wasn't the same player I was 4 or 5 years before that. I stopped playing at Newport, not because I was tired, not because I was disinterested in the sport. I got to the stage where basically my body couldn't take anymore. I moved home to Newfoundland in 2005, and of course, Dr. Parfit got his hands on me and said, no, you can't retire. I said, well, Pat, I can't practice. I can't. He said, well, we'll manage your practicing. In other words, you don't really have to do any, just play the games. So that's basically what I did. I'd come to practice and I'd watch, and you can ask all the props that were around the Rock at the time. They had to do all my grunt work and practice just so I could go out and run around in the games and get a bit of glory. But that's, at the time, I really struggled with that. I could have probably stayed on with the Dragons in that sort of capacity, but I just didn't feel it was the right thing to do. I think that if you're going to truly be a part of the team, you've got to be involved in all the team's activities, all the team's preparations, and you've got to shed your own, you know, sweat and blood, just like everybody else, to earn the right to play on the Saturday. Didn't have a level of comfort doing that with the Dragons, where I finished up in Newport. When I got home to the Rock, Pat basically didn't give me a chance or a choice. So I decided to play. So, I mean, I was probably playing just 8 to 10 games a year, part of the National League at the time. Very fortunate to win a few national championships, which I'm sure I'll get to, but I wasn't playing the best rugby I'd ever played in my life. And I think in 2007, when I went to that World Cup, I was able to fulfill a role, but it wasn't the Rod Snow that was, you know, that I was used to. I didn't have the same impact. Was I able to hold the scrum up and do a job there? Absolutely. But in terms of an impact around the field, I just didn't feel like I had the same impact. But at the same time, I also felt a duty and a responsibility to the national team, to the national program, to do what I could. And though I wasn't proud necessarily the way I played, I was proud that I was able to step up and do a job that needed to be done at the time for the national team.
Well, you did for sure, right? I mean, you've always, you know, whenever you put on a Canadian jersey, you've always had a great showing for Canada, and you know, and brought everything to the field as best as possible. I mean, obviously, you mentioned 2007 was tougher, but it is tougher to play rugby at that stage in a World Cup against professionals when you're not training like you were before, and certainly your body was breaking down, and you're a lot older. It's a tougher ask for sure. So just a few things I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you know, I've slipped you a few bills in the past where you've talked me up, so I won't ask you about that. But besides Gareth and myself, maybe you could talk about some of the players that you've played with on the Canadian team that you really enjoyed playing with, and some of the, you know, the maybe some fun stories from past days or past matches that you've lined up for Canada with them.
Yeah, you know what? I guess it's easier to be influenced. Can you guys hear me? I got a message there. My internet is. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're in and out, Rob, but you're pretty good.
I think as a young player, it's easier to be influenced.
I can, Rod.
Okay, I think as a young player, it's much. Hello?
Yeah, you're stopping and starting.
Yeah, we're here, Rod. It's just, yeah. Get off the Netflix.
Is that your
boys.
kitchen as your office?
I got 3 boys here in the house who are no doubt facing eyes into some sort of Netflix or video game that's probably stealing my bandwidth. Anyway,
you hope it's just Netflix.
So you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. As I was trying to say, this is my 5th attempt at it. I think as a young guy, it's easier to be influenced. And I know that when I came on the national scene. And in 93, 94, I looked at the pack of forwards we had, and I mentioned Al, but I mean, like Gord McKinnon, Norm Hadley, Glenn Ennis. In the front row, you had Eddie Evans, Dan Jackart, you had Carl Svoboda and Mark Cardinal. I mean, I really looked up to those guys, and I think they were incredible role models. And they weren't just good rugby players; they were amateurs at the time, but they really had very, very professional attitudes. And I think that was something that I aspired to. And they were tough, hard guys, and I think that's what made them good rugby players. And that's kind of the way I saw myself as a player. And I think that's really something that really influenced me. And I'd like to think near the end of my career in the Canadian team, maybe I would have had that sort of influence on some of the younger guys coming through. I mean, I'm not sure if I did or not, but I think for me, that was the most memorable period of my career where I really looked up to the players around me. And as genuine, good guys and gentlemen, but ferocious competitors and tough men as well, not just rugby players. So those are probably the guys I look up to the most, and guys I was most inspired to play with in the Canadian setup.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great compliment to those guys, and I know those guys thought very highly of you, as you know, and have mentioned that to you in the past. I'm sure. Maybe you can mention maybe some other players that you've played for Canada who you think maybe didn't get the attention or the respect they deserve, but that were stalwarts for the Canadian side, that did things that maybe the media didn't always pick up on, but certainly as a teammate you certainly saw their value.
Yeah, and there's a number of those guys, and it's hard to start singling guys out. I always think back of a guy, I'll tell you a guy who I don't think should have ever been a good rugby player, and that's Mark Lawson. Smart guy, super intelligent. He started out in the back row, couldn't quite do it, though I think he even had caps in the back row, and he eventually moved to the front row. Not what you'd call your stereotypical flashy rugby player, but a guy who just had an attitude that was like, he just didn't quit, didn't give up. Kind of like Old Yeller. What was Old Yeller's real name? Al?
Yeah.
But just a guy who had an incredible
Colin
work
McKenzie.
rate, tough as nails.
Colin
He would take a beating
McKenzie.
to keep on going, and those are the sort of guys that really was a Colin McKenzie. That's right. Those are the sort of guys that you remember, absolute warriors of the trade, and they're always a pleasure to play against. And of course, we had guys like I remember a guy like Bobby Ross, who was a great friend of mine. Had an opportunity to go to Cardiff and play. I mean, he was a pleasure to play with and a great friend. It's the opportunity to play with guys like that you always remember.
I love Bob Ross.
Absolutely.
I remember growing
Absolutely.
up watching
great
him play, and
examples there, Rod.
it was a
Maybe
back just playing
you
rugby
could,
in Newfoundland. I just remember
I
Bob
know it was
Ross.
tough for a guy like yourself coming from Newfoundland, one of the first. I think we're experiencing a bit of a delay.
Sorry, I missed you guys there.
Happening at your end as well, guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty.
Maybe
We're pretty in and out here. I can see Rod pretty good now. Rod, you can hear me?
I can, yep.
All right. So I know, Terry, if you had other questions, I certainly have a few more questions for Rod as well.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Al. I mean, we still got about 15, 20 minutes. At some point I'm going to push into, because there is a lot of people here from Newfoundland on the call, I would suspect. So we're going to get into Rod's time coming back here, and we can talk about. And again, for anybody on the call that doesn't know, Al has agreed to come back. We're going to kind of reverse the roles here. That's why I kind of want to maybe get the Rod's situation. But Al, you can definitely ask a couple more questions. But we are going to reverse this. Al has agreed to come back. And we're going to reverse this, put Al on the hot seat. Some of those things may overlap, but obviously Al has had a different professional career. He's played in England and France, and he's taken him a lot of different areas. And he's also in the World Rugby Hall of Fame. And so there's a lot of things we can talk about with Al again, but this is going to happen. Al's agreed to it. It's certainly not going to happen next week, but in the next coming weeks for sure. I mean, this COVID thing ain't going anywhere. So we're going to be here for a while. So go ahead, Al, and keep up with a couple questions, and we'll definitely get to the next part for sure.
Well, what I was going to say, Rod, I mean, obviously it must have been tough for a young player like yourself to come and join the national side out of Newfoundland. Not a lot of players from Newfoundland had come before your time. I mean, certainly there was guys like,
Mike Luke.
Yeah, Mike Luke, who had gone and played there for Canada, but you were the first real Newfoundland player that established himself and gained all kinds of caps. Is there some guys that you played with in Newfoundland that you think should have got capped who didn't? And is there any guys that that stand out in your mind who didn't get a fair shake? And
in my opinion, and I've said this before, that when I came back to Canada in 2005, I would have put the Newfoundland pack, the Rock pack, that group of forwards at that time up against virtually any Canadian pack of all time, never mind currently. Would they have battled in one hands down? I'm not sure, but would they have competed? I'd put my life on it, and I'd be happy to go to war with any of those guys. And I can't single out guys there. I mean, that whole team, Frank Walsh, Peter Densmore, O'Leary, and Mooney. And in the back row, you had, Mike Webb, Kevin Parfrey, Muscles, what's his name? Goodland, the other guy who's I think he's a doctor now. His father was the lieutenant governor.
Fagan.
Fagan. I mean, it was just a great pack of rugby players, and they were able to win, I think, 3 national championships in 5 years or 4 years or something crazy after not having won any previous to that. That was, and I can't single guys out. I was fortunate to be part of that team. Very fortunate to be part of that team. So without singling any guy, we had a decent back line. But I mean,
they had a national caliber backline, in my opinion, too, and I think that's what did it.
Well, I mean, I certainly never played against a Newfoundland side that was not tough. It was always a tough game against Newfoundland, and certainly they improved over the years greatly, and obviously to win the national championships like you did, fully deserving of that. So I won't put you on the spot, I guess, on certain players, but maybe just on a more lighter side, Rod. Maybe you could talk a bit about your experience in in New Zealand when you ran into a celebrity in a McDonald's at one point. Maybe you can talk to that's probably one of the few stories that occurred after the game of rugby was over that I can tell. And Al, I'm not sure how well you remember the story, but it was just me and you. I remember it was after we had played New Zealand just before the '95 World Cup, and we're staying at the Sheraton downtown Auckland, and big fancy hotel. And about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, myself and Al decide before we go home, go to bed, we're going to hit McDonald's for a burger. We walk into McDonald's, and there's a group of guys ahead of us, and you can tell that they're a posse of rappers. And I look, I say, Al, look, man, that's Vanilla Ice. And this guy turns around and looks at me and says, man, that's Ice-T. He ain't white, he's black, right? So I was like, oh my God, no, I just called Ice-T Vanilla Ice. And anyway, I remember, so myself and Al order, and it's just funny how these things stick with you. And I'm standing up waiting for my order to come in, and I remember hearing the guy who's the leader of the posse, I guess, say now, Ice-T wants his McChicken with no sauce on it, no sauce. And lo and behold, Ice-T gets a McChicken that has sauce on it, and his caretaker, I guess, goes up and lets the staff have it. And I felt like maybe I should go help the staff here a little bit. And I was like, no. You just sit right there and don't do a thing.
So yes, that's one of the few famous people I'd say I met in my life outside of the sport of rugby. But don't ever call iced tea vanilla ice. Not a good thing.
Oh, that's classic.
Terry, I got a lot of other questions I can ask, but I mean, I think we're getting short of time. I know you want to lead on to some of the questions that the people have.
Are we taking any questions from the audience, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, Liam, you can open it up and people can start typing in a few questions if you want. I'm kind of curious though. And again, I said this from the start. I mean, we're kind of Reader Digesting a lot of this context here at this point. I mean, we could have stayed on the Newport topic for about an hour, and we could have stayed on the World Cup subjects for another hour. And that's why I'm hoping we'll probably get a second part to this. But I think most importantly, Rod, I just wanted to touch base. I mean, I wish I had some more funny things to ask you because those are obviously great stories. But you retire from Newport. Beth is obviously over there with you. I mean, you spent 10 years in Wales. You established kind of a family over there as well in terms of your friendships with people. Obviously, you're coming back. I mean, you make a decision. I don't know if that was a decision you've always had in your head to come back, but you decide to come back, and then you come back and you get right into the fold of playing rugby again, and you touched on it with basically Parfrey. As much as you think that you didn't know that, you knew that he wasn't going to not ask you to play, right? But it was no problem, no brainer decision to come back to Newfoundland.
It was, and we talked about it. I mean, I had an opportunity. I could have stayed with the Dragons at the time, possibly as a fitness coach or strength and conditioning coach, or some part of the coaching structure. But we always said, we had a young family at the time. We wanted to have more children. We thought that, to be fair to them, it would be best to raise them back here in Newfoundland with their grandparents on both sides. So that was ultimately the decision we made. And it was tough because my wife had a great job. I had the opportunity to stay there. And I mean, I had some of the best friends I've ever had in my life. And I'm proud to say that, in the 10 years I was there, I was best man for one of my teammates. And I stood up for another one of my teammates as one of them was groomsmen. So, when you spend that much time in a place, you do establish friendships like that. And it's tough to leave, but I think in retrospect, it was the right thing. My knees might disagree now because I played an extra 4 or 5 years, albeit a lower level and less demanding physically, but I still did it. But I mean, I think it was the right decision for me at the time.
So you come home in 2005, I think it is. Around there, and boom, just like that, and I mean, I'm going to get to this first because I was little tiny part of that program just building up, and I remember the Newfoundland team gradually getting progressively better from the 90s into the 2000s. And then, you kind of come on the stage right at the peak. And I honestly think it was not the peak because it was kind of the peak. And then we plateaued across that peak for a few years at Newfoundland Rugby did. But you left when Newfoundland was probably in the 8th best team in the country type of thing. And then when you come back, we're chewing at the bit. We're 3 of the last 5 national championships probably at that point, or 3 or 4 last 2 or 3. I can't remember the exact stats, but we're up there. We're not 8th place anymore. You come back, and you just touched on it earlier about the guys that you played with. What did you when you seen Newfoundland Rugby and what we were accomplishing? Because again, at that time, there's no social media. You don't know what the hell is happening at home as much as you would now. You come back, you jump into this program, and then you see these guys that were probably kids when you left, and now they're grown men and they're accomplishing some pretty cool stuff. How did that happen? Like, what did you think of that when you came home?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I left Newport, and I remember my last couple of years there. I remember, as I mentioned, when the year we won the cup with Gary Teichman, I could tell from that day that we were never going to lose the cup. It was Gary's time to shine. For Newport, and for Newport to shine and win a cup. And I always felt like my time would come with respect to that kind of opportunity. I remember a year or two, I think it was a year later, we made it either to the semifinal or the final of the Welsh Cup again against Llanelli. And that was the year I think I was retiring. And I thought that maybe the same thing could happen for me, that I could go out on a grand scale, and it didn't happen for me. So when I came back home to Newfoundland, I thought that the first time I ran out with these guys back here, that Rock Pack and that group of Rock players, I thought that, you know, this might be where I find my little bit of success and my moment in the sun that fits my place in the world right now. And I can remember even in the championship game in that first year I moved back against the Prairie Fire, I think we were down, I'm going to say 10 or 12 or 15 to nothing at halftime.
13-3.
And I could tell 15-3. And I remember looking around the room and the boys, I think the boys were beaten. And I remember just thinking, the guys, listen, we can make this happen. And 5 minutes into the second half, you know, I realized this is my opportunity. This is my time. And I had a big impact in that game, but really it was the guys around me that inspired me to make that happen. So it was easy to get back in. Now that was winning the first championship when I moved home, and obviously I stuck around for a few more years after that. But the first one and the first time coming back, that was a no-brainer for me. I saw it, I guess, somewhat selfishly as an opportunity for myself, but certainly as a big opportunity for my teammates in my province as well.
No, and it was big because you know, Pat was on here a couple weeks ago, and he was asked, and Pat has a pretty decorated background as you do, and Pat was asked what was some of the greatest game, like what was one of the greatest memories of rugby in his life, and of course for him, obviously he has some family ties in there, but it was winning that national championships, having his family, having his wife there and his kids there, and just the whole sing songs and everything that was happening down the dressing room. So, yeah. You know, being part of the program growing up since I've been 15 years old, and I remember him and the Frank DCs of the world, and I just remember, you know, there could be, you know, everybody's world, you know, everybody has a World Cup. Everybody might not be the World Cup, but at some point there's something you put on a pedestal, and I think Pat really put that national championship for Newfoundland on a pedestal, and the Fondley accomplishment and being there at that time, I think was remarkable. And then you come home, you do that. Then the next year you play for the Rock again, and we win another national championship. But I think you get the whisper in the ear to go play in the Churchill Cup that year, right?
That's right. And I mean, again, it's one of those things there. I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to handle it, how I wanted to do it. It's like this, you got to commit to something, and once you do, you're all in. But for me, you know, it was a great group of guys. I really enjoyed their company, and I thought they made me a better player at a stage in my career when I didn't think I had much left to offer. So it's, I mean, I guess in some ways I owe them a debt of thanks and gratitude as well.
Yeah. So and you already touched on it, but it pushes to your last World Cup. But I just want to, for the last thing before we push on to some questions, I want to talk about, you know, and Al was in this here as well, because I know we had the World Cup qualifier that was in St. John's. And that was in 2006, the same year that obviously, so you come back from a professional career thinking, this is going to all be over. You play you play for Newfoundland, win a national championships in 2005. You're convinced to go play in the Churchill Cup and push towards playing in the next World Cup. Then we have at home in St. John's, we have St. John's versus Canada versus the U.S. World Cup qualifier, and I think Newfoundland Rugby Canada Swallows Rugby Club put off a phenomenal event in St. John's. Al, you were there as well. Talk us through just that day, and eventually you being the winger that scored the game-winning try in the corner.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where it's kind of you feel like you put enough work in for long enough, you're going to get fair reward. And I mean, no one ever sets out, as I say, you set out on a journey, you don't ever really know where it's going to end. But to be honest, to be able to play for Canada against no country I enjoy beating more than the Americans. And I can tell you, most of the times I played them, we came out on the winning end, but I lost at least once. So the opportunity, for Canada to play against the States here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the first international rugby match, and only to date, hopefully that'll change next year. The only match to date to be played, and to be not just a part of it, but a significant part of it as the hometown boy, that was absolutely pretty special. And it's funny. The coach at the time was Sluggo and Rick Suggett. And he had a vision. He had a plan. He said, we got this play and we're going to run it. And Codd is going to score over there in that corner. And I talked about the mental aspect of the game, the imagery, and I had to play in my head, and it unfolded just as I practiced it in my brain and just as the team had practiced it. And one guy can't make that happen, right? You've got to have a team full of people. And there's no doubt the players around me were inspired that day playing in front of a raucous Newfoundland and Labrador crowd, a rock crowd. And it was our day in the sun, so to speak. And everything went our way that day. Al, I don't know if you remember what the final score was, but it was a fair bit for us, not much for them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was, I mean, it was very tough, as you know, Rod, when you retire, to go back and watch Canada play, because you still want to be part of it. And that game for me, watching it, I was very envious of the players on the field. The crowd was great, as you said. I had long petitioned Rugby Canada to return to play a test match in the Atlantic provinces. We had beaten Scotland and New Brunswick in 1990, and it was a great crowd then. And I never got another opportunity to play with the Canadian side in a test match. And I thought the crowd was fantastic that day. You were fantastic, and you know, it really hit home on how well we're supported across the country. And you know, full credit to the likes of Pat Parfrey and Noel Brown and all the people that put that together. And I remember some of the comments coming from the stands as the Americans were warming up and during the game, and they were comical. Some of them were a little bit offside, as you can imagine, but it was a great occasion for sure.
As they say, Al, it's Newfoundland, not Disneyland.
Yeah. So listen, Rod, no, and listen, guys, I appreciate everything. We're kicking right at 1.5 hours here right now. So I don't have a whole lot of questions coming in. I didn't know, Al, if you wanted to have any more. If anybody, Liam, I don't know if you want to pop in here and see if anybody wants to raise their hand. This is your opportunity now to kind of step in here now. I mean, we got a few minutes here that we can entertain a question or two. So this is your opportunity to ask, you know, Rod and Al, any questions?
Yeah, I haven't got anything here in the chat, but I don't think I have anybody raising their hand. So I don't. There's no questions here.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to finish off by saying what a honor and a treat it was for me to play with Rod. You know, there's a lot of times you look around the dressing room and you look down the lineup as you're listening to your national anthem play and you're playing a test match, and to have a guy like Rod beside you means a lot to me. Certainly meant a lot to his teammates. You know, Rod was an unbelievable player for Newfoundland and for Canada. Really good friend. I have a lot of friends from the national team over the years. There's no one that I wouldn't want to go out and have a beer with. You know, just guys that were real good guys. But you know, I have a lot of close personal friends and guys that I'm still in contact with on a regular basis. And Rod is certainly one of those guys. You know, great family, great wife, great person. Love to get on the drinks with Rod. But I certainly love playing with him. He's a credit to his family, his province, and his country. So, Rod, congratulations on your career and everything you've done, what you continue to do, be an inspiration for players in Newfoundland and inspiration for players across the country, for what you did on the national level, but certainly at the club level in Newfoundland and in the professional club level in Newport. Kudos to you, and you're a real good friend and a great guy.
Thanks, Sal. I'm gonna listen. I just want to tell you. I'm gonna say one story quickly that kind of comes to mind. That's humorous, and I think it's a good way to end. Obviously, all our lives are a little bit different now as a result of the situation in the world with COVID-19, and it's great there's these opportunities that Liam and other people are hosting forums like this where we can keep our sport relevant. We've got a tough road ahead of us to get the sport back, given the nature of our sport and the way this disease kind of takes hold of people and the way it's transmitted. But I do think we'll get there, and I think a little bit of humor doesn't go astray. And Al, I'm not sure how much you remember this story, but I'm sure you've heard it before. But it's on the way back from, I think it was a tour to South America, and I think it was my first tour down there where we played Uruguay and Argentina. It might have been after my first cap. Anyway, we were pretty happy with the way we played down there. I think the day we played Argentina, I think we lost the game by 2 points, but we outscored them 3 or 4 tries to 1, Al, something like that. You weren't there.
I think I was injured in that game, or before that game. I was out with a shoulder dislocation. But yeah, you lost by 3. I think you outscored Argentina as far as tries go. Yes.
Yeah, but it wasn't close in terms of tries. I think it was 3 or 4. But I mean, that's not the story. So anyway, it's time to fly home, and we get on the plane, and I'm with Ian Gordon, who's a good friend of mine on the team, a back row player. And our plan is to get on the plane and to have a few drinks on that 20-odd hour plane ride home. So we get on the plane, and myself and Ian Gordon are not sitting next to each other, but we try and arrange it so we can. And we end up with a middle section of the plane. So I'm on one seat, Ian's on the far seat, Ian Gordon. Gorgon was his nickname. Gorgon's on the far seat. And in the middle is this little
This is
old
a great
lady.
story.
He's probably 80 years old. And I say, excuse me, ma'am, would you mind if we switch seats so I can sit by my buddy? She said, I'd really like to help. She said, but I'm so scared of flying. And I actually feel really comforted. I got 2 big, strong young men sitting on either side of me. And I said, well, okay, that's great. No problem. I said, but do you mind if we talk and share a few drinks? She said, no. She said, when the stewardess goes up and down, she said, I'll even order a drink and you guys can share. So we were like, hey, great. This is perfect. So myself and Ian continue to drink, and we're having a conversation with the lady, and it's all going well. And myself and Ian are continuing to drink, and eventually the steward says, we're shutting the lights off now. You guys aren't getting any more drinks. So Ian says, don't worry about it. Just let her go. I've got a flask of vodka in my bag under the seat. So anyway, myself and Ian continue to drink long after the lights are off. And I remember the little lady next to us, she's sound asleep, and myself and Ian eventually both pass out. I remember waking up in the middle of the night on this plane, I don't know, 16 hours in. I remember going, my mouth was so dry. So I looked down on my chair or on my tray table, and I grab a glass and I down it. And I'm like, oh, that's straight vodka. And I'm looking around, I need water. I don't want to cause a ruckus and hit the button or anything. So the lady next to me has got a glass of water. I knew she wasn't drinking anything at that stage. So I picked it up and I downed it. I was like, what was that? It didn't taste like water. Anyway, I just say enough's enough, and I go back to sleep. So I don't know, however many hours later, I get this banging on my shoulder, and it's a stewardess who's lost her mind with us during the whole flight. She says, excuse me, sir, did you see that lady's contact lenses? I'm like, what? She goes, that lady, her contact lenses was there in that glass, and now they're gone. I said, I remember you clearing the table and picking it up earlier. I didn't do anything with them. And the little old lady goes, you said you didn't see them. And she goes, I didn't. And of course, so we pin it on the stewardess. And the stewardess knows there's something up. So anyway, she goes back to the back of the plane, and she comes back with a bottle of wine and says, ma'am, I'm really sorry. If I cleared your contact lenses, I didn't do it intentionally, but we have this bottle of wine that we're going to give you. The little old lady says, okay, give me the bottle of wine. Thank you. And then she looks at me, she goes, you know what? You should have this. And she gave me the bottle of wine. And myself and Ian drank that bottle of wine then. And it's funny, every time I use the bathroom for the next 2 weeks, I swore I could see that little lady looking back up at me. I like to call that story the time I screwed Air Canada, which, let's face it, doesn't happen that often. Anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks, Liam, for putting this together. Al and Terry, great job. I see a few friends from Newport, and I've got lots of texts on my phone from people on YouTube. It's a great opportunity, and as I said, the opportunity to keep our sport relevant during these, what are, let's face it, less than ideal times for everybody who's a rugby fan is a great opportunity, and we should embrace it when it comes. Thanks, everybody.
Great job, Cud.
Hey everyone. We'll be hopefully back next week with a panel of women. So we'll go there, and I'll unmute Terry. And thank you to Al, thank you to Rod, and thank you to Terry for coming together and putting this off for us. I don't know if you have any final thoughts, Terry or Al.
No, I just
As
want
you
to
unmuted
say,
there,
fellas,
Terry.
listen, yeah, no, perfect, 100%. Listen, I was like 100% the most excited more than anybody today to have this conversation. A lot of people here, especially in Newfoundland, Rod, and in Newport and in Canada, we all know who you are, and we can Google your accomplishments, but obviously to hear them from the horse's mouth is number one. And Al, we are 100% taking you up on your agreement to come back here. And we're going to get you on here, and I hope you had fun here this evening, and I hope you did too, Rod. Thanks everybody for coming in. We'll get a pile of questions for the next time around, and listen, everybody, thanks again. I think it went well. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. So long.
Cheers, thank you.